Welcome to the Keeping IT Real podcast. This podcast features honest and transparent conversations about what it takes to manage corporate technology and expenses today. Each episode, listen to true and personal stories from IT professionals who are working hard to make sure their business stays connected and competitive. I'm your host, Jethro Castillo, and let's meet our next guest. Today, I am joined by Scott Lee, Associate Vice President and Head of IT Infrastructure and Operations at Arch Mortgage, a leader in innovative mortgage insurance solutions. Scott brings extensive expertise in IT infrastructure and operations, driving technological advancements such as cloud transformation, disaster recovery, and business continuity to support business growth and operational excellence. Scott, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just jump in. How did you get started in the world of IT?
Well, I think like a lot of people, especially when I was younger, video games. I love playing video games, and the consoles just weren't doing it for me. And when I say consoles, I'm talking old type consoles, Atari and television, right? So I jumped to a PC, didn't know anything about it, but had to figure out how to load the right drivers and do that sort of thing. And it got me interested. And so from there, I went to sales. I did some support in the Windows 95 days for Microsoft, and then worked on a development team at Intel, working on some technology we're using today, the H323 stack that allows video and voice over TCP/IP. And then did a lot of startups in the .com, and from there went to data centers. Once the .com bubble burst, there was an opportunity for some infrastructure work at data centers, which led into some of the fintech infrastructure I've been working on over the past 15 years.
You've kind of grown up with technology and have seen it grow and develop and speed up. What is it like seeing it grow from where you started? Because you mentioned, the .com, and then you're like, oh, now I'm working on the fintech side for the last 15 years kind of deal. What is it like kind of seeing the progression of technology to what it is now, which is exceptionally fast and advanced?
No, you're not wrong. It's definitely fast. The pace of technology improvement and advancement is just unbelievable. Back in the day, we all lived by Moore's law, right? The number of transistors in a processor would double every 18 to 24 months. And that held true for a long time. But the technological advancements around that now have just skyrocketed, especially with the incoming AI, Gen AI, and that sort of thing. It's rare in an industry where you get to see multiple transformational elements arrive. And I saw the introduction of the internet. I saw the introduction of blockchain, video conferencing, and now we're seeing the introduction to Gen AI and LLMs and machine learning, and this is going to propel IT forward again. So it's been a lot of fun to see the evolution over time.
He has a lot of jargon, and I have had a lot of guests on here with a lot of different names and titles, and you kind of are the head of IT infrastructure and operations at a certain company. I've met other people who they're the head of IT and they're the only person who is in IT. So they do infrastructure and operations, and then they do cybersecurity, and then they do service delivery, and it's just like a kind of a catch-all. But I'm curious, right? Yours is pretty focused. What does that look like within the context of an IT team, an IT department, as the head of IT infrastructure and operations? What's it like, I guess, not looking at all of IT, but a specific subset, but also I feel like there's so much overlap that you kind of, just explain to me what that looks like in a working environment.
Yeah, it's great to be in infrastructure, because without infrastructure, nothing in IT works. Right? So you pick up the phone, there's no dial tone. You try to print, there's no printer, there's no laptop to print from. You try to save your files, there's no network to save it out off your machine. There's everything revolves around infrastructure. So even though it is very specialized, I really focus on infrastructure. These days, a lot of that means providing cloud services and other software-based services that the teams use to do their specialty things. So because I can run the infrastructure well, the developers on development teams have an opportunity to develop using source code repositories that I enable that access to. They have the ability to publish their their development activities to some sort of deliverable that my team enables. So there's, even though it's very specialized in what we do, we really do touch all parts of the business and all parts of IT. So that's sort of the way I look at it. And that's what keeps me really interested in infrastructure, because it's never the same thing twice. One day I'll have somebody say, hey, activate Copilot for me. And the next day I need somebody asking me to, develop a new image for this new thing, then new version of the OS and whatever, and make it available for deployment into our container systems. And that's, it's a very different, different day. Every day is very different.
You obviously have IT initiatives that you prioritize and get done. IT resources are obviously very limited. That's not a surprise for any organization. So when I think you can see where the question is going. With the limited resources, how do you choose what you prioritize and what you don't prioritize? Knowing that you also have to be flexible and catch things that might need immediate attention.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that's one that is a challenging one for any IT leader and even an IT engineer. They're going to wake up every day with a very long list of things in their backlog that need to be done. And so as a leader, it's my responsibility to help those engineers prioritize, to make sure they're working on the right things. And so, the very first thing when you say, what do I do in a day? There's three things that really come to mind, and that's meetings, meetings, and meetings. So I have to talk with everybody to understand how to prioritize those things. Meet with the managers and team members on my team, meet with my peer groups, meet with business leaders and other groups outside of mine. So I need to understand, what their priorities are and then why. And so when I start prioritizing the efforts of my team, I look first to the impact on efficiency, because if I can do things more efficient, or I can enable someone else to do things more efficient, I can get more done. And so that helps to raise the bar of the individuals. It helps to raise the bar of the team and the organization as a whole. Second thing I look at is, what's the impact to the business? If the business is not here, I'm not here. So how can I make the business more efficient? How can I make them more effective in what they do? And so if there's a large positive impact to the business, that's something that I think I need to focus on. And then finally, what's the importance to the people? Sometimes people can bring things up that maybe don't impact efficiency as much and don't impact the business as much, but it's important to them for some reason. And so why is it important to them, and how can I prioritize that appropriately to make sure that it's that we're heading in the right direction?
So that all makes sense, right? It requires a lot of communication to know what all of those things are, so you know what to prioritize, right? That's why the first thing you said is meetings, meetings, meetings. How do you conduct those meetings? And then what do you do afterwards to then allocate appropriately? Because it's one thing to hear them, and it's another thing to actually hear them and then hear everything and then know what to do. How do you play that fun game of Jenga, if you will?
Yeah. So one of the things I learned early in my career was I need to understand my strengths so I can understand my weaknesses. So there are many tools out there that I can look at to help me identify. I've used most of them in one way or another. One that I always go back to is one called StrengthsFinder. And so my top two strengths are that kind of, and that, I promise we'll get to the question here.
Yes.
My top two strengths are futuristic and strategic. And so I think that really helps me to look at everything that's happening to say, okay, I think I know where this is headed. And so in order to allow that to get to where I think it needs to go, I need to have the conversations to make sure I'm right. I need to have the conversations to see what other people's understanding are and adjust my futuristic and strategic thinking around that. So as an example, if I want to implement a configuration management database, there's a lot of underlying foundational elements that need to go into place before that becomes effective. And so what are those things that need to go into place? And those are the things I need to prioritize to set future success up that everyone wants to see.
That's interesting. Obviously, for the StrengthsFinder test, you answer questions and then it tells you naturally what your strengths are. What do you believe you have that allows you to really be good at thinking forward and strategizing? It's one thing to be strategic and future thinking, but it's another thing to know the inner workings underneath that. So what, if you can even articulate that, why is it so natural to you to strategize and think towards the future?
That's a really good question. I think it's the breadth of the experience I've had in the background that really helps me here. I mentioned earlier that I started in sales. I did some support for Windows 95. I did some development work on the H.323 stack and the H.324 stacks for video conferencing systems, and did some e-commerce development, then moved to infrastructure and did a lot of fintech infrastructure. And so because I'm not really pure in any one area, it sort of allows me to see, well, if the developers are looking to do this, they're going to need this and this and this from infrastructure to make that happen. And it kind of allows me to make that leap. And then I add on top of that several business degrees. So I have an MBA and a bachelor's in management. I'm actually currently working on a doctorate in management with an information technology kicker. And so, having that management gives me now a view of the business as well. So maybe I don't know underwriting specifically as it relates to art, right? But I know how a business operates and what things are important to that business. So it can help me, look at those things as well down the road.
You said you need to know your strengths so you can know your weaknesses as well. I'm curious, and this will kind of transition to the next part of our conversation, but I kind of want to hear it from your perspective. You have these strengths. Where are your blind spots, and how do you make sure that you can see those?
Oh yeah. Well, and it's a great question, because knowing your blind spots, you're never going to be able to elevate yourself as a leader without the danger of being undercut by a blind spot if you can't see them. And I know by being, calling it a blind spot and then knowing that you have to see them, it's kind of an oxymoron. But it really is important. I know that one of the areas that I struggle with is understanding the finite details of the tactical. Right. So knowing exactly what's going on right now, because I mentioned I was futuristic and strategic. That means my mind is ahead of it. And I don't want to come back to right now. And so, I struggle doing that. And sometimes I have to force myself to do that. And so, a couple of things that I do, hiring is certainly one of those things. Bringing the right people around me that can help fill in those blind spots is critically important to not my success, but the success of the group that I'm leading, right? If I can't fill those blind spots in, the group itself is going to struggle, and I can't have that. So bringing people in who fill those blind spots and can do the things that I need them to do to make the group better, that's tremendously important. And I think one of the most important things any manager can do for his or her group. The other thing I do is I create a 4-box, and I use this in Outlook religiously, where tasks that I'm working on and issues that come up, I drop into one of 4 boxes. And box number 1, let me start with box number 4. It's not urgent. It's not important. Who cares, right? So those get low positions on the priority list. The next one is that it is urgent but not important. So again, it's kind of like, okay, why is it urgent if it's not important? Let's push it down. Box 2, though, is an interesting one. And box 2 is where it's important, but it's not urgent. And this is where I try to focus a lot of my energy, try to really understand all these really super important things that are happening around me, but have time to really focus on them and bring them in. And that avoids going into box 1, which is both urgent and important. Those are your fire drills. And so if I can avoid box 1 at all costs, then I can focus on what's tomorrow, not today.
I think this is where a lot of the IT struggles happen, 1 and 2, where it's like, I am too busy putting out fires for me to even touch these important initiatives that I want to touch. And now I can't even move ahead. I'm stuck here because I don't have enough time. And we can go into a lot of different ways to look at this. I think Gartner has like the run, grow, something else. I forget the third one. And then another one is,
transform.
Thank you. Run, grow, transform. And then another one is kind of that jar where you have like big rocks, pebbles, and then sand. And obviously the urgent and important are, I would say, like kind of like the pebbles, and then you have the rocks, which are the important ones. But if all you're doing is pulling out the pebbles, you're never actually making any progress on the jar. But if you're only doing that, you don't have time to pull out the rocks. And so when we look at the 1 and 2, and it's so simple, right, to be like 1, 2, 3, and 4, those boxes, and it's great. But the reality is, if 1 is still super full, you never touch 2. And so how do you, I think we're going back a little bit to prioritizing IT initiatives again, but how do you ensure that 1 is good so that 2 can happen? And I think I'm saying this for you to tell people who are really struggling with that in the IT world of just like, how can I not just like keep my head afloat? How can I be ahead at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah. And that is a struggle throughout IT. It's been a struggle throughout my career, to really understand that. And there are a few objectives that typically end up on the priority list moving year to year for people on my team. One of those is, understand how to eliminate or reduce repeatable incidents. So if we have the same system going down over and over and over again, why is it going down? Let's really get to the root cause of that and fix that, because then that eliminates a whole bunch of bucket 1, items, and we can move forward. And then when it comes to bucket 1, emergencies are going to happen in IT. If anyone who says that I've been in IT for years and never been on call are probably lying, or they're just not that important on their team, right? Everyone's on call. And so how do I make it so that the on-call people don't lose entire weeks of their life because they're constantly on a bridge line trying to fix a problem? And that's to focus on the roots of those problems. So having a process in place that allows us to bring the right people to fix the right problems on an emergency, super important. I've been in groups where, this thing is broken, quick page everybody to the call, and you'd end up with 50 people on the call, only 3 of which can actually do something to fix the problem. So we've just disrupted 47 people we didn't need to, and they cannot work on box 2 because they're focused on something they can't help with in box. Getting that process in place, making sure the right people are at the right place at the right time for handling emergencies, and that the emergency isn't just run through restoration of service, but run through actual root cause, get to the bottom line first. Yeah. That's what allows you to free up box 1 and allow people to focus on box 2.
Because if it's urgent and important, right, and all you're doing is just restoring the service, it's going to come back again urgent and important. So you might as well, if you're already spending the time, spend the time to make sure it never happens again. And it brings me back to the first answer you ever said was, I like to focus on efficiency first. That's how you do it. We need more time. If resources are limited, you just need to save money and you need to save time. And one way to save time is just to realize what is not efficient and make it more efficient. I think that's really, really, really cool. I kind of want to have you toot your own horn a little bit. I kind of want you to talk about a successful IT project you've worked on in the past or recently that you're proud of, or that kind of like sticks with you as a defining moment of your IT career.
There are definitely a few. I mean, over 30 years plus, there have been a few big moments that I'm like, that was really cool. I wish I could remember more about it. But there is one that's a little more recent, and in today's world, I think very impactful. And that is, I worked at a large bank, and we did a study. I ran the at this time I ran the operating system group for the enterprise. So that involved, hundreds of thousands of servers, both Red Hat and Windows servers. And being a large bank, it was highly regulated. And the regulators had some very strict rules about saying, okay, if it's a high related vulnerability, then it needs to be resolved, in a certain amount of time. And if it's critical in nature, it needs to be resolved faster. And so I did a study that said, okay, let's take a look. If a patch comes out, and our patching cycle, is 30 days. So a patch comes out just before the patching cycle starts. Well, the package for that patching cycle has already been created. So that vulnerability, if it's a high rated vulnerability, is not going to make it in that cycle. And it could be 45 or 50 days before it gets deployed. So in reality, we're not meeting the 30-day requirement that the regulators have put in front of us and that the enterprise is determined to be acceptable. And it gets even worse when we go to an emergency, a critical vulnerability, a 0-day or something like that. How long does it take to patch 100,000 servers, 400,000 laptops? It takes an army of people to do that. And so it's really difficult. And the business wanted us, and when I say the business, I'm not talking the business units because they want less patching. I'm talking about the regulators, information security, and the company as a whole. They wanted us to be able to patch everything in a 0-day within 72 hours. No easy task for sure. Just think of the scale of 100,000 servers all hitting the same repository to pull down the same patch package at the same time. Just unbelievable challenges that go along with that type of stuff. But we did. We were able to do it. We were able to automate many of the processes, which is the key, and have some self-healing properties within the automation that say, oh, the repository is busy right now, but I'm going to try back later and not call this an error, right? So the automation was definitely the key. And then being able to, the business was very upset because they're saying, well, with all these emergencies, we constantly have to stop our deployments and our improvements. We have to disrupt our business and cause outages for our customers. This is a problem. How do we resolve that? And the answer was to make our environment more robust and roll patches through their environment and not bring an outage to the table. And so we were able to do it. And when I left the bank, it was, to my knowledge at that time, the only large bank to be able to patch at that speed with that volume. So it's a pretty impressive thing to see because everything has to fire correctly. The emergency process has to work. The people on the call have to know their roles and responsibilities.
Wow.
The governance of that call has to understand what's at stake, what's happening, who's doing what, who's responsible for what. And then all of the systems have to just work. The automation, the repositories, everything's got to just work in order for that to happen in 3 days, really, 100,000 servers. And without disrupting business, that's a tough call. So we were able to do it. And not only did it impact our emergency patching, but it allowed us to streamline our regular patching so that we didn't miss that 30-day window. We were hitting that target 98% of the time.
It's funny. This is a really classic moment. It feels like of sink or swim because the 30-day patch you were making in 50 days and that was pretty consistent. And then, but there was no change, desire to make that more efficient. And then there was this 72-hour period and everyone was like, oh, we got to figure this out. And I love how that is also affected. Like you didn't just do it for the moment, but you made the change that you needed so that it's affected it the long term. I feel like that was the exact answer that you just gave in the previous answer, but in a more specific way. So I just love how you're very consistent in what you know and what you are passionate about and what you're good at. And just seeing the inefficiencies and making them more efficient. It's just beautiful to hear that you're not just all talk. It's like, oh, it's a lived experience for you for sure. Not that I was ever doubting you in any way. So that's really awesome. So we've tooted your horn. We've celebrated that a little bit. We look forward. What are some of the challenges that you're kind of facing in your role right now, and how are you choosing to tackle it?
Yeah. It's interesting as I dive deeper into my education side, I learn more about how that applies to my professional side. And one of the things that I've really uncovered is that really at any business that I've worked at, any company that I've worked for, the true cost of IT has always been this mystery, right? It's cost. IT has always been considered a cost center. And companies have just said, well, it's a cost center. It's something we have to do. So, and in the early days, it was, I've got this IT project here, throw it over the fence to this IT cost center, let those people go work in their corner for a few days or a month or whatever. And then they'll come back with a solution. And the solution is, well, this is what we can do for you. And hopefully you'll like it. And we don't know how much it costs, but take it, right? And that's a problem. So right now, one of the biggest things that I'm working on professionally is to make the cost of IT more transparent, specifically infrastructure, since that's where I focus. Because if I can bring to my business leaders what it truly costs them to run their business, then they can run their business more efficiently, more cost effective. They can price their products more effectively, and that gives us a competitive advantage. So this is an area that I'm focusing on. Again, this has been in almost every IT group that I've ever worked in. It's just, this big black hole of money spending, right? And people don't understand the full benefit of that. And so allowing this to go to the business with a more transparent look and feel to the budget will also help me align my IT strategy with the business more closely. So there's a lot of benefit to doing that. And so I'm looking at better ways to make that happen.
What are your personal, not challenges, but what are your goals and your priorities in your life now? Personally, like for your career, what's kind of, for Scott, what are you kind of trying to accomplish for yourself?
Boy, that's something I think a lot about. And I think my most immediate goal is to finish this done. Yeah, the dissertations are no joke. The program is very, very difficult, but it's very rewarding at the same time because I'm researching things that are directly related to what I do professionally. So my dissertation topic happens to be the impact on communication with the rapid advancement of remote work due to COVID-19.
Can I read it when it's done? Is it like a public dissertation, or is it for? Oh, okay.
It will be. It will be published. Yes, and who knows what that could lead to. But Microsoft recently did a study that shows that 87% of all remote workers think that their productivity has improved since being moved to remote. And I've been a remote worker for years, long before COVID. But I've also worked in the office. Right now, I'm actually a hybrid. I go in the office a couple days a week and work at home a few days a week, as you can probably. And so I get both, right? I see both sides of that fence. The same Microsoft study said that 85% of managers feel that their remote workers' productivity is gone. That's a huge gap.
It's a huge dichotomy. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Someone's wrong.
Someone's wrong. That's right. So the question is, and the thing is someone's wrong, but nobody's wrong because perception is reality. Mm-hmm. So we need to understand that. Why is there such a gap in reality between those two groups? What communication lines are not being fulfilled? It used to be that a manager could walk around the office and say, oh, this person's here at 8, leaves at 5, always in front of their computer. Well, it's not necessarily indicative of productive work.
Yeah.
Right. So we have to measure differently. We can't just say they're here from 9 to 5 and they do their work. We have to measure outcomes. And that's, I think, the biggest shift that people are struggling with.
I want your take on that. How do we even right that ship if for a dysfunctional company, let's say? I don't know if there is an easy answer for that.
Yeah. I'm sure it's not going to be at the end of this, I'm going to write a book and here's the magic key that it's just not going to be that easy. But, I think back to my own career, and I think, I may have a problem that I'm working on. Go back to my e-commerce development days. Something's just not working. It's just not working. And I'm working on it days and days and days. And it's just I'm not getting the result that I want. And then I don't know how many times, and any IT person can tell you that they've had the same moment at 2 a.m. Aha. That moment hits you 2 o'clock in the morning and you're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I need to fix this problem. And then you go and 10 minutes later, what you've been working on for 10 days is now resolved and you can move forward. This is what we need to foster it. I mean, should it take 10 days? I don't know, right? Depends on the problem. But sometimes engineers are really challenged with the problems that they're trying to tackle. We need to give them the space to think it through and really ponder what the solution is and why it's important, and let them come up with that aha moment, whether it's 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it doesn't matter. The outcome's going to be you've got a product that's not just working, but working really well. And that's what we need. And so it comes back to at the beginning of every year, one thing I do with my team, and in fact, my whole company does this, and many companies probably do, is we sit down and say, what are our goals for next year? And like most companies, these goals end up being part of the evaluation at the end of the year, right? And so I like having that, but I think the goals need to be structured a little bit differently than they have been traditionally. We use now the objectives and key results, the OKR framework, where the objectives are very vague. Cost of IT transparency is an objective. That doesn't tell you much, right? But the initiatives and the increments beneath that need to specifically say, here's what I'm doing, and here's why it supports that objective, and here's why it's important to the company. Because if people understand the why, they'll better come out with the. So that's where I think we struggle a lot, is understanding what the objective truly is that they're being measured against. And you can't have someone who saved 10 hours of efficiency here be the same as someone who saved 10 hours of efficiency here when that efficiency has a bigger impact on the previous one, right? So we need to understand all of that before we can really measure against it. And I think that's where some of the disconnect is.
Final question is soapbox moment. What are some of some really important lessons or thoughts or experiences that you didn't get to share or did share over the course of this conversation that you kind of want to end the conversation on?
Yeah, when I think about this question, I think about if I had to give, advice to my younger self or someone who's coming into the industry, it's fairly new. I would say there are three real things that I've taken away from my career. And the first and foremost, most important thing is you have to be a continuous learner. I learned a lot about a lot of different areas within IT, and now I'm even learning more about the business. All my degrees are late in life. So, the business degrees, equating IT to business, all of that is continuous learning. Learn something new every single day and just continuously, open yourself up to that. What you're doing today may not be, what you need to do tomorrow, which leads right to the next one. And that's be adaptable. As you learn new things, your career will change course a little bit. Be ready for that, and be ready to embrace it when those opportunities arrive, because those opportunities are what are going to bring you to the next level. I've done that multiple times throughout my career, which is why I've had development, support, infrastructure. It's all over the board. We do need people to deep dive into specific areas like data science and that sort of thing. But there are even paths within that narrow lane that they can choose as things come up in their career. So continuously look for those things. And then when you do enter something as a new company or into a new area within your specialty, whatever the case is, come into it as an outsider and then continue to look at it as an outsider. The 6 most dangerous words in any IT organization are, that's how we've always done it. IT does not stand still for anybody or any organization. So find new ways to do old things, and you're probably going to be more successful.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for your time. Like I said, there's so many questions I still want to ask you. And so this is a personal ask, but if you're willing to do a part 2 down the line next year, I would love to have you back on, because I have questions I'm itching to ask you. And I think at that time, maybe your dissertation will be done, so we can talk more about that in detail, and I'll have read that. So if you're open to doing another one, I'd love to really talk to you more about this in general.
Happy to come back anytime.
Awesome.
I had a lot of fun. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you again, and take care, Scott.
We hope you enjoyed this Keeping IT Real episode, and thank you for listening. Make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. This podcast is all about celebrating and connecting professional heroes who work hard at IT every day. To continue the conversation and learn how VCOM can help you better buy, manage, and pay for your technology, visit us at vcomsolutions.com. Until next time.